Okay, so moving on to inverses with radicals. For this lesson, we're going to find the inverse of a function that either has exponents and or radicals. So remember your steps to find inverses. You're going to rewrite the function, replacing function notation, f of x or g of x, h of x, whatever it happens to be, with y. Second step, switch our variables. We're going to then solve for y. That could take a few steps. And then don't forget we're rewriting it in inverse notation at the end. Things to keep in mind for this lesson, you need to remember that if you're trying to undo powers, you're going to take the same root. If you're trying to undo a root, you're going to do the opposite of that, raise it to the same power. So if we have a square root, we're going to raise to the second power. If we have a cube root, we're going to raise to the third power. So here's our first example. We have f of x equals -3 plus x minus 2 in parentheses squared. So first thing we want to do, step one, we're going to take out f of x and we're going to replace it with y. That's always going to be step number one. Step number two, we're going to switch x and y. So we're going to rewrite anytime we see y, we're writing x. Anytime we see x, we're writing y. Just like that. Step number three, we want to solve for y. The first thing we want to do for this case, we want to get rid of that -3 by adding 3 to both sides. Now we have x plus 3 equals, and then in parentheses, y minus 2 squared. This is where we want to undo the squared with a square root. So now we're going to undo that squared with a square root. So we're going to square root the right side. The squared and the square root cancel each other out. But we can't just square root the right side. We also have to square root the left side. So we're going to square root the x plus 3. So now if I rewrite, I now have the square root of x plus 3 equals y minus 2. It's just y minus 2 because the squared and the square root are inverses. They cancel each other out. The last step here to get y by itself, you're going to add 2 to both sides. When you add 2, that 2 does not get put underneath the square root. So some people put a little hook on their square root saying, hey, this is where it ends. That 2 is not allowed to be put underneath the square root. It cannot be combined with that 3. So f inverse of x equals the square root of x plus 3 plus 2 out at the end. Again, that plus 2 cannot be put underneath your square root. It cannot be combined with the 3. Sometimes you'll see people put it in front of the square root, so you'd have 2 plus the square root of x plus 3, and that would be okay. One thing I always want to point out to my students, when I look at one of these problems, I mentally go through and I look at the original for inverse operation. So if I see, the first thing I see is a -3. So the opposite of that would be a +3. I know I need a +3 in the end. I see a -2, which means I need a +2 in the end. And then I see a square, which means I'm looking for a square root in the end. So I know my answer has to have these 3 things in it. I've just got to figure out what order they go in by working through the problem. So I'm double checking. I got the 3, I got the 2, and I got the square root, so I'm probably good. For this one, again, I would go through that same process, figure out what the inverses or the opposites are. So I have a 5th root, so I'm looking for a 5th power. I have a +1, so I know I need a -1. I have a -2, so I know I'm going to need a +2. I know my answer should have these 3 things in it when I get to the end. So I'm going to work through our same steps. First step, we're going to take f of x out, replace it with y. Again, we can't combine that +1 with the -2 because the +1's underneath the fifth root and the -2 is not. Step number 2, we're going to switch x and y. So now we have x equals the fifth root of y plus 1 minus 2. Here we want to isolate the radical, so we're going to add 2 to both sides, giving us x plus 2 equals the fifth root of y plus 1. Now that I have the fifth root isolated, I'm going to take both sides to the fifth power. Notice when I take the left side to the fifth power, I'm putting it into parentheses. For the right side, I have the fifth root and the fifth power that are going to cancel each other out, leaving me with y plus 1. One last step to get y by itself. I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. So y equals x plus 2 in parentheses to the fifth power. The minus 1 hangs out at the end. So right here would be my final answer. F inverse of x equals x plus 2 in parentheses to the fifth power minus 1. Questions on this? So we can always double check. I wrote that I should have a fifth power, a minus 1, and a plus 2 in my answer, and I have exactly that at the end.